Suzanne Singer from Notary Cam is joining me today. So I'm very excited. We're going to do things a little differently. If you've done these in the past, we're going to actually see a live presentation of how remote online notarization works in New Jersey as part of our presentation today. So a little different than what you normally get with this. It's mostly me just droning on. So if at the very least you'll hear from someone else besides me for the first time in 5 or 6 years. So that's exciting. This one, we will be actually transitioning halfway through the presentation from my screen to Suzanne's to show the demonstration. So there'll be a little like 30-second, 1 minute gap in between. So if you see that on your system, don't panic. That's supposed to happen. Don't reset or reopen Zoom or anything like that. Let's get started. Today we're gonna talk about remote online notarization, particularly here in New Jersey. And how it's a very useful tool, not only during COVID when it sort of started to really catch on, but certainly even more so now in today's real estate and title world. So let's get started. All right. So let's start with some good old-fashioned statutory language. It wouldn't be a CLE without that. I want to first talk about sort of, we'll call it the standard or the old way of notarization, what everyone should be familiar with, actually stamping things with going in front of someone, showing your ID, that kind of thing. I want to make sure that we understand that process before we get into the remote side, because it is important to understand the basics and the fundamentals of how notarization and acknowledgments work in New Jersey. So New Jersey's actually got one of the, I think, the best notary acknowledgement structures in the country. It makes it a lot easier to do compared to a lot of other states. So let's get into why that is. So acknowledgement proofs in New Jersey, to acknowledge a deed or other instrument, the maker of the instrument shall appear before an officer specified and a corresponding statutory section and acknowledge that it was executed as the maker's own act. Now, the officers included within that statute are pretty broad, and this is one of the reasons I like New Jersey compared to other states. It's any officer of this state, meaning New Jersey, authorized to take acknowledgments or proofs in the state or in any other United States or foreign jurisdiction. So that's important. So if you are an officer who is authorized under Connecticut law or New York law or New Mexico law to take acknowledgments, or even England or the Bahamas or something like that, as long as it conforms with the New Jersey process, we will still acknowledge this. But in New Jersey, the people who are authorized are attorneys at law, which at the very least, that means if you went to law school, it's paid off that you basically are a built-in notary. So congratulations, everybody. 2, a notary public, so someone who goes through the process of actually becoming a notary, which I'm sure in the title word most people are. 3, a county clerk or deputy county clerk. So those 2 individuals are authorized to take acknowledgments similar to an attorney or a notary. The register of deeds, that should say registrar, excuse me, of mortgages, or a deputy registrar, and a surrogate or deputy surrogate. So there's a pretty broad group of individuals outside of what you would historically think or typically think can take acknowledgments. It's not just someone who's a notary. It can be an attorney or a clerk or a surrogate or a registrar. It's also important to note that in New Jersey, the law does allow for any authorized New Jersey officer, like we just talked about, can take an acknowledgement outside of New Jersey. So a New Jersey notary or New Jersey attorney could notarize something in London or Germany or the Bahamas or Japan. We've seen that happen on closing where their clients are traveling outside the country and we need to get something done, and the line to the consulate is really long, and what are we going to do? I have said, and I'm not going to say works every time because you actually have to find the person, but if you know of someone who's a New Jersey authorized officer who's in London or Berlin or wherever you might be, go to them and get the document notarized and then FedEx it back to the States, and that will be acceptable. Now, sometimes we have to work with some of the clerks to remind them as how the law is stated, because sometimes they'll say, no, 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 this needs to be an apostille or it needs to be done at a consulate, et cetera, et cetera. But that's something that we can talk about for hours in a different presentation. But The law does allow for that. I think that's very important to say that it does allow for that. Now, what about acknowledgments outside the United States? I just kind of got into that. So any officer of the United States can take them. So any foreign service or consular officer or other representative of the United States to a foreign nation within the territory of that nation. So that's one of the more common typical things where you could send someone to an embassy or a consulate and make an appointment there, and they will notarize documents under their official capacity, which, you know, is very much accepted throughout the United States and certainly in New Jersey. But like I said, sometimes the lines or the wait times for appointments for that can be very long. So it's always good to have another option, like either working with someone who's an authorized individual outside the country, or like we're going to talk about today, remote online notarization. Any officer of a foreign nation authorized at the time and place of the acknowledgement by the laws of that jurisdiction to take proofs of acknowledgement. So you could get an English notary or British notary or a Bahamian notary in the Bahamas. Technically, those are all acceptable under New Jersey law without necessarily the need for an apostille. But again, that is sort of a topic that we could spend another hour or two talking about. And in the instance of time, we're not going to get into that. But technically speaking, you don't necessarily always need an apostille. It's certainly helpful. It complies with the Hague Convention. But under New Jersey law, it's not always necessary, technically speaking. But I'm not saying or advocating that you just ignore the apostille requirements, because it might slow your closing down. Particularly because if the acknowledgement does not designate the officer as a justice, judge, or notary, the acknowledgement or affidavit appended must contain a statement of the officer's authority to take acknowledgement or proofs, which very well could be the apostille. So just keep that in mind when you're dealing with foreign acknowledgements, and particularly when they're in other languages. You might have to get it translated if it's not also in English, because we need to make sure that we know what the officer is actually saying. Are they saying that they actually saw that the person who's signing this is that real person, that kind of thing? So if it's in another language, it might have to get translated along with an apostille, that kind of thing. So in New Jersey, what's acceptable identification? This comes up a lot. I'm sure everyone here is a notary or an attorney or anyone else who might be able to take acknowledgments has seen this, where you probably get a wide gamut of what people show up to with what they want to use as official documentation to prove their identity. We want to see driver's license with pictures, passports, passport ID cards. Those are becoming more and more popular. Naturalization papers, non-driver ID cards that you can get from the MVC, that kind of thing, as I think the gold standard. Things like club memberships to like BJ's and Sam's and Costco's, they're not going to work. Even if they do have a picture, that's not very official. Credit cards, at least not with that additional ID. I really wouldn't recommend using credit cards. Invoices, your bank statements, anything like that, you're probably not going to want to use those. Everyone should have a picture ID or a naturalization paper, if they don't, that is issued by an actual authority, so that you can prove I am who I am. If you don't have those things, technically speaking, the notary has a lot of discretion. If you look at the New Jersey Notary Manual, which you can find online, you're able to see whether or not you can, attest that this person is because of personal knowledge, or whether or not you have a third party that can attest that they are, that other person is who they say they are. And if you can believe that third party reasonably, you can also technically do that. I don't think that's nearly as common, because now you're saying, well, John Crowley said that Roberto Di Toronto is who he says he is when he was signing this deed. It's not great. But when in doubt, contact your underwriter. There's other notary resources that you can look into as well online to find out, should I really be using this as an acceptable ID card or not? So let's talk now about remote online notarization in New Jersey. It came initially, we first got RIN, which was remote ink notarization, which is different than remote online notarization. That was first authorized during the COVID pandemic as a way to deal with the fact that no one could really get together to sign documents and have them acknowledged, but we still needed to do so. So how did we do that? Remote ink notarization came into place, where there was still physical wet signatures with ink. However, it was watched, the notary would watch that process through some sort of audio and visual capacity, Zoom or Team. Well, no, I don't. Teams might have been around in COVID. Feels like forever ago. Skype or whatever it might have been, and then complied with certain statutory requirements. Is actually under executive orders, and then that would have been okay. So the notary under RIN would say, "All right, I'm going to watch you sign this document physically with a pen. And then you need to send that document to me. I'm going to confirm by watching the video and other means that what I watched you sign is what's actually now in front of me. And then I will stamp it. And now it is acknowledged under the remote ink notarization process, and we're good to go. That does not need to happen anymore because we can now go fully digital with remote online notarization in New Jersey. And in order to do that, I think initially what we need to do is get back to the basics and understand what the law says in terms of definitions, because that is important when you're trying to get into the remote online notarization game, so to speak. So let's get into definitions. First one should be easy. Remotely located or location individual. An individual who is not in the physical presence of a notarial officer or notarial officer performing a notarial act. So, what does that mean? It's a person is not in front of the notary physically when they are signing documents. That's pretty easy. Communication technology is, and these are state definitions, so bear with me, they're a little dense, is an electronic device or process that A, allows a notarial officer and remotely located individual to communicate with each other simultaneously by sight and sound, and B, when necessary and consistent with other applicable law, facilitates communication with a remotely located individual who has a vision, hearing, or speech impairment. So that's like I said, B is a necessary, if necessary, excuse me, requirement. A is really what's going to be required all the time. As if you're doing remote online notarization, you need communication technology that allows the notary and the individual to communicate with them in real time, simultaneously by sight and sound. Identity proofing is a process or service in which a third person provides an officer with a means to verify the identity of a remotely located individual by a review of personal information from public or private data sources, and we'll probably get into that in a little bit. That's important because we need to make sure, even more so than physically in front of someone, that this person is who they actually say they are. And it's important to note, and this is why I mentioned at the beginning of the presentation, these officers that we're talking about, it's the same type of people. We're talking about attorneys, notaries, clerks, surrogates, registrars. Those type of people are still going to be included within this remote online notarization notarial officer. That process doesn't, or those individuals aren't going to change under the new law. A little more definitions. Biometric ID. It's using a human's physical or behavioral human features to digitally identify a person. Examples of biometric identification includes fingerprints, facial, and voice patterns. This is more and more important every single day with the introduction and advent of AI. I'm sure everyone's seen or heard a story where AI is getting better and better for all these wonderful things, but it also can be used for more nefarious things like impersonating individuals. There's a story out there within the last 6 months or so where a person got a video call from they thought was the CEO of their company. Now, this wasn't a notary situation, but they basically got a video call from someone saying that they were the CEO, and they could actually see the CEO sitting at a table, a conference room, saying, "Hey, we've got this deal. I need you to send me $1 million because we need it right now." And I mean, it looked and sounded just like that person. So unfortunately, their accounting team sent them the money and it ended up being all fake. So biometric ID systems are even more important now, even with videos or, like online video conferencing, because as AI gets better, it's getting easier to fake those things. So there has to be tools to make sure that what you're communicating with is an actual human and the right human. It's very important. A digital public key certificate is also a defined term. It's an electronic credential issued by uh, a trusted third party that is used to identify a person who signed an electronic record. That is important because obviously we want to make sure that when we're using outside third parties, that they are able to certify that what they are saying is accurate and correct. It's very important. Dynamic knowledge-based authentication assessment. I mean, that is a five-letter word or five-word word. It's identifying a person by asking the person a set of questions derived from public or private data sources for which the person has not been provided prior answers. That's been around in some form or the other for a while. KBA, knowledge-based authentication. You know, if not only within remote onlinerization, it has been used throughout sort of any sort of like online system where you have to prove who you are. You might even see it sometimes when you're logging into certain things and it asks, what was the first car you drove? Or which one of these addresses did you not live at? That kind of thing. Computer systems are able to basically scrape data from either public or private sources, and then basically ask the person questions which only they should really know. I guess if you really want be creative and a good criminal, you could probably start working out ways to figure out some of these questions. But the way that these are set up is that at least one or two of those questions, only really the person who should know it is going to know it. And that's helpful to prove who you are and that you are actually the person who should be signing these documents. So it's very important.
And John, can I jump in for 1 second? One
Sure.
important factor about NotaryCam versus some other remote online notarization platforms is we require that it's called knowledge-based authentication, those 5 questions that are generated from public records. On our platform, that's required to take place on camera during the session so the notary can assure that there's no person helping you answer those questions. So on other platforms, that can take place off camera. So someone could be forcing you to answer those questions and or like elder abuse or whatever situation. And so that's a big differentiator. And every platform requires that there's only 2 minutes to answer to prevent you from being able to Google the answers, et cetera. But that's a big differentiator in terms of not just the letter of the law, but the spirit of the law around the ID verification.
Thank you very much. That's a really good point. I think it's certainly a best practice. Obviously, we want to make sure we're doing everything we can that, again, to truly verify that these are the right people signing, and to Suzanne's point, that they should be signing, that they're not under duress or they're getting help from other people outside the system, so to speak. And I like the time frame too. Actually, I feel like I'm giving everyone too many minutes to answer these questions. Maybe I should break it down to two. Finally, let's wrap up. Foreign state means a jurisdiction other than the United States, a state or federally recognized Indian tribe within the United States. So that means out of the country, or to break it down. In other parts of the law, foreign state might mean a neighboring U.S. state. But in terms of this portion, when we say foreign state, we're actually talking about outside the United States, which particularly means, and that we have a definition for that, outside the geographic boundaries of the United States, Puerto Rico, the United States Virgin Islands, and any territory, insular possession, or other location subject to the jurisdiction of the United States. Now, we could probably spend another hour or so going through every single location that may apply to, but we don't have the time for that. But, just baseline, think if it's outside the United States and it is not controlled or subject to the laws of the United States, it's probably going to fall within the definition of foreign state. And obviously, you can chat with someone like Suzanne or someone else at NotaryCam or us to maybe determine whether or not it is or it isn't. So let's talk about the RON requirements in New Jersey. A remotely located individual may comply with the law by using communication technology to appear before a notarial officer. Now you know why I went through all these really fun definitions, because the law really does rely on them when explaining all this stuff. the law specifically provides that the notarial officer located in this state, meaning New Jersey, may perform an act using communication technology for a remotely located individual by any of the following methods. So the law does allow this, but we're not necessarily going to say that's probably best practice. Personal knowledge of the identity of the individual. So let's say if I was notarizing something for my brother, I probably know what he looks like, how he sounds. If he shows me ID, even better. And there's certainly questions that I could ask him that no one else would know or probably should know, knowing my brother. So if you're able to do that, that's technically acceptable under the law. Not necessarily, I think, best practice or the best way to do it, but it is an option. And I think it probably, on the, let's call it the standard or the physical side of notarization, that has occurred for years and years and years. So if you have a very good relationship, you know this person, you might not need to ask for some of the other information. But I think just in being thorough and best practices, it's probably always a good idea to do it uh, the the longer way or the more efficient and secure way, which is the second piece here. Satisfactory evidence of credential analysis and identity proofing services to be used with communication technology required for Ron, which we'll see in a little bit. And then satisfactory evidence of identity proofing by using at least two different types of ID. So like your state driver's license and your passport. So um, so something to keep in mind. But continuing on here, the notary officer verifies that the document being executed by the principal is the same document before the notary. So everyone needs to be looking at the same document. With platforms like Notary Cam, I don't think that's necessarily going to be really an issue ever. But if you're using someone else or maybe something that's not great. And Stewart has a full list of approved vendors. If you're a Stewart agent, you need to be using one of the ones that we have vetted and approved, because not all things are created equal, just like anything else. Some of the software platforms, while technically maybe be compliant, we don't feel like really are using best practices. They're basically just hitting the bare minimums. And we wouldn't want that. We prefer that you do it well every time and secure, and we know that we can rely on it. So that point right there, probably not as important, but certainly good to know from the legal perspective. The Notary Public creates an audio-visual recording of the performance. I like that, performance of the notarial act to maintain an electronic record. It's like watching a play or something. But you need to make sure that there's a record of the full act, the signing, the stamping, all that kind of stuff, all that gets recorded. An attachment of a electronic notarial certificate that includes notation confirming that the notarization is an online one. That is important under the law. There needs to be a certification, excuse me, which states that this was done using remote online notarization. The law requires that we explicitly say that when we're doing this process. It needs to be part of the document. The certificate must indicates that it was performed using communication technology. And then under the law, an officer may select one or more tamper-evident technologies to perform these acts. So under the law, you can't make anyone choose any officer or notary, an attorney, or whoever's doing the actual act of acknowledging. You can't make them use one software or the other. They can pick what they want, but it needs to be tamper-evident. It needs to be secure. It needs to be shown as secure. So that's important to keep in mind, that they can select whatever they want as an officer. However, your underwriter, particularly Stewart, might say, well, that's great, you've chosen this one. However, we don't think that does not meet our level of standards when it comes to making sure that this is done properly and securely. Therefore, we can't accept it for acknowledgement, at least from an underwriting perspective. It may be legally compliant, even recordable, but it's important to, like I said earlier, note that not all these systems are created equal, and we want to make sure that we're using the best versions of those to make sure that we can rely on these documents so we don't get claims in the future, because obviously that's our biggest concern. A person may not require an officer to perform an act with respect to an electronic record with technology that the notary has not selected. Just like I said, you can't make anybody choose any software. However, if it doesn't meet some of your underwriting standards, you might have to go to a different one if they don't want to use it. Now, it's important to note that the law requires that notaries notify the state treasurer that they will be using some sort of electronic means to perform notarial acts and identify the technology that they're intending to use. The state wants to know what the notaries are doing. It's their responsibility to sort of regulate notaries. So it's good that they know what you're doing. And if the state treasurer has established standards for approval of communication technology or identity proofing, the communication technology and identity proofing must conform to those standards. Now, that's what it says in the law. As of now, I don't think they've done too much in terms of setting those types of standards. But it's going to obviously be a moving target, particularly as more and more goes on. So make sure that, when you're using these systems, particularly if you are a notary or an attorney who's taking acknowledgments regularly and using this type of way to notarize documents, that you're keeping an eye on the state treasurer's website. You're looking at the New Jersey Notary Manual for updates, which is probably a good best practice, regardless of whether you're using Ron or not, just to make sure that you're doing everything you're supposed to be doing and you're not going to get in trouble with the state. So, almost done here. County clerks or registers of deeds and mortgages, now this is in the law, shall accept for recording a tangible copy of an electronic record containing a notarial certificate as satisfying any requirement that a record accepted for recording to be an original if the officer certifies that the tangible copy is an accurate copy of the electronic record. So if you do something electronically and it gets printed out, if the officer certifies that it is an accurate copy of the electronic record, that copy, the physical copy, can be submitted for recording. Now, with e-recording technology being the way it is and the popularity of the same, this scenario probably isn't going to be as useful as maybe everyone intended it to be, because if you've got an electronic copy and that's acceptable for recording, you can just take that and then submit it through Simplifile or CSC or whatever it might be, and save yourself the time of printing it out and getting it certified and all that kind of stuff. But it's an option. And then notarial officer, guardian, conservator, or agent of the same or a personal representative of a deceased notarial officer shall retain the audio-visual recording created under this chapter or cause the recording to be retained by a repository designated by or on behalf of the person required to do so for a period of 10 years. So if you are getting into the remote online notarization game, so to speak, make sure that you have the way to securely retain the recordings of every single one for a period of 10 years. They have to be accessible, non-corrupted, and secure. You don't want people hacking into this and getting particularly sensitive information from these videos or these recordings for a period of 10 years. That's very important. Otherwise, you're going to be in violation of the statute. You could lose your ability to acknowledge documents, either as a notary, an attorney, and you can get into even more trouble, on the civil and criminal penalty side. So absolutely keep that in mind when you're doing that kind of stuff. So let's talk about Ron outside the United States, like I said, and we made a big deal of explaining some of those definitions because this process is technically available outside the United States and still complies with New Jersey requirements. For a remotely located individual who is located outside the United States, and we sort of defined that a few slides ago, we have to ensure that the record is to be filed with or relates to a matter before a public official or court, government entity, or other entity subject to the jurisdiction of the United States. So it needs to be related to something to do with the United States. Or involves property, which is definitely something that we need to worry about, located in the territorial jurisdiction of the United States, or involves a transaction substantially connected with the United States. Now, that second part, substantially connected with the United States, probably falls outside the scope of what we're talking about here. That first part, real property located in the territorial jurisdiction of the United States, that certainly helps us, is a pretty easy thing to figure out. Is this within the United States as previously defined or not? If it is, then we can use this process even if we're outside the country. And the act of making the statement or signing the record is not prohibited by the foreign state, which in this case, we're talking foreign country in which the remotely relocated individual is located. And you have to complete a certificate and stamps a certificate in accordance with the requirements, like we just talked about, and creates and saves an audiovisual recording of that act, just like you would normally. You can do those things if you're outside the States. Now, I don't know if there probably is somewhere maybe a full list of every country in the world that specifically prohibits remote online notarization and those who don't. I don't have that readily available. I apologize. But that would be something to look into if you are working with someone outside the United States. Just make sure that whatever country they might be in does not prohibit remote online notarization, or their statute is written in a way that it wouldn't be allowed anyway. As long as you don't have to worry about that, or you can confirm that that's not a worry, then this is a really important tool and a helpful tool, like I said earlier, when people are traveling outside the United States, but selling or buying property in the United States, in New Jersey, or getting a mortgage, and you can't get to a consulate or anything like that. No one can FedEx documents. You have this opportunity now using remote onlineization to keep your closing on track and moving forward. So that's the law in a nutshell. Again, we only have an hour to chat about it. We want to make sure we show the presentation. But I just want to put out a couple stats here. Lender adoption is growing every single day. You can see here by this chart that more and more lenders are accepting remote onlineization, not only in New Jersey, but across the country. And I think, and a lot of people, I think the same thing, that it's just going to get more and more until it's pretty much accepted everywhere. I mean, technology has changed our industry so much and will continue to do so. And this is just a way to make everything easier for consumers. And it does help a lot with security issues regarding acknowledgments. So I can only see that this continues to be a popular choice. Just as important, the mortgage investor agency accepting the GSEs, Fannie, Freddie, Ginnie. They are every day working on processes that make it easier to do this and accept it. So again, on the secondary mortgage market, that was an initial concern that they weren't going to take these. That's no longer really the case. Again, just because everyone's using it and they got to get on board. MERS, which is not a GSE, but sort of an assignment repository, for lack of a better word, also uses the system, and they've got systems that help with that as well. And before we get into Suzanne's half of this, this is from one of her presentations, actually, the basic steps to secure a remote online notarization process. Suzanne, I don't know if you want to talk about this or I can.
Sure. So thanks, John. So my team will actually show you in person all these steps and how easy it is next shortly. So all you would have to do for a RON transaction is you would upload your documents. We can do that if you're under contract via API and just have it submitted that way, or we can create a customized order form for you, and you can do it that way. Then the transaction will be scheduled, the session will be scheduled, and that will be communicated to the signer. And when we communicate with the signer, we tell them the time of the transaction, and we also tell them what the requirements will be, that they will need a laptop or a desktop with a webcam. We give them the ability to test their internet speed. We recommend Google Chrome as their browser, but they can use any up-to-date browser. So we set them up for a successful transaction. Then they will meet with the notary, which is what you'll see live in just a few minutes. The two-factor authentication, which John talked about, and I'm not going to steal the thunder from Natalie and Andrea. And then the documents have been prepared, so the signer can e-sign them. The notary then applies their electronic seal and stamp, and then it's completed. And then I'll let Natalie go through all the things that John mentioned about identifying that it was completed via remote online notarization and how you can see it's sealed and tamper resistant and all the other key attributes.
Yeah, so like Suzanne just mentioned here, this last slide is sort of the benefits that go beyond just the simplicity and ease of using Ron to get your documents notarized. It makes borrowers and sellers and whoever else is notarizing documents just happier. It's less stress on them. They don't have to go anywhere to notarize things. They don't have to go to their attorney's office or their bank's office or their local notary or their buddy who's a notary, all that kind of stuff. You can just do it from the comfort of your own home or work, wherever you might be. There's very sophisticated levels of authentication that go well beyond you just looking at an ID physically to make sure that it's real, that we've talked about and we'll see in the presentation momentarily. There's less cost technically, there's no more print, there's less printing. Certainly you're not making nearly as many copies. There's no shipping, there's no FedEx. Everything can be done pretty much immediately, so it saves on time. Fraud prevention basically goes into that customer verification I was just talking about. There's audit trails and documents to show what happened to these documents. So it's easier to keep a track on that from a fraud prevention and certainly management standpoint. And in terms of using platforms like NotaryCam, in order to maintain that 10 years, they're the ones doing it for us so that we don't have to worry about finding a safe place to stash these things. So with that, I am going to stop sharing my screen for a moment, and then we're going to switch over to the live presentation, and everyone here is going to get to see what it actually means when you do a notary system or a notary process remotely. So we should be
Thank you,
good
John.
there, and then the NotaryCam team will take over. So just give us a second.
Hi, my name is Andrea, and I am one of the customer success specialists here at NotaryCam, and I'm going to go ahead and start with sharing my screen. And what you're going to see here first is an email that is sent to the signers if you are using our service and submitting through an order form, and it's going to one of our notaries. We will submit this email to your signers to let them know their date and time of their transaction. It will have their meeting link included. It will also let them know that they can go ahead and test their audio and video connectivity here, as well as letting them know to use Google Chrome as a preferred browser, but they are able to use Safari, Firefox, and Edge as well. Currently, Internet Explorer is not compatible. We do ask that they make sure that they do have their ID on hand so that they can show that to the notary on screen. It must be government issued, unexpired, and scanned copies are not reliable and will fail. So it does need to be an actual copy of that ID or the ID itself. And then again, I said it will have their meeting information here, and then they can go ahead and contact the notary if needed prior to the transaction. So this is just a sample email that will be sent to your signers. Now I'm going to go ahead and sign this over to Natalie.
Thanks, Andrea. So basically today we're going to be demonstrating how the signer will join a transaction via that meeting link that Andrea just mentioned in the email. And then we'll also demonstrate how they complete ID proofing and sign the documents during a meeting with the notary. So as you can see here, we do have the signer's view showing. So once she clicks on that meeting link, it's going to prompt the signer to create an account here at NotaryCam. She's just going to be brought into her transaction here. So once she establishes her account and creates a password, she's going to be brought right into the NotaryCam signing room. Just give her a moment here. She's got to create a 16-digit password. It's kind of long. And then once she creates that password, she'll agree to the terms of service, and then she'll just select continue. So she is brought right into the transaction. And here you will see the participants listed in the top left corner. And we are able to have multiple signers, of course, but for today's demo, we just have one listed. We are also able to co-locate multiple signers or have them sign if they're in separate locations. And as you can see in the lower corner of the screen, we also have a chat feature, and that allows the signer and the notary to communicate just in case there are any audio or video issues. So I'm just going to go ahead and say hello to my signer here today. And then we also have the documents here in the middle of the screen. So the signer is able to see all of the documents that are part of the transaction. They can join the session prior to the meeting to review the documents, but the system will not allow them to sign anything prior to the notary joining the session. So the first thing that will happen is the notary will introduce themselves, let the signer know that the process is audio and video recorded. They'll cover any questions with the signer. They'll ask them to show the front and back of their ID on camera. The notary will also perform an oath and then prompt them to agree to the e-sign consent. So as the notary today, I'm going to go ahead and do that on my side. And she's going to get a pop-up here that says, do you consent to the e-signing? And she's going to select yes. Okay. And then once the signer joins, the notary will start the video session like I mentioned. The signer will see a purple box pop up across the top of the page that says join video. I'm going to go ahead and show you what that looks like here today. Typically, the notary would prompt that join video session. They would stay on camera the entire time. But because we're running two platforms here at the same time, I'm going to go ahead and end the video. So I'm going to start it here so you can see what it looks like. And you'll see at the top of the screen there, she'll get the join video button. And then the notary and the signer will appear in the room throughout the transaction. And you'll see us here at the top of the screen in just a second. Hey, everybody. We'll go ahead and end the video now. All right. So next, the signer will have to complete two-step authentication. And this process is an algorithmic analysis of the signer's ID to ensure validity of the government ID, and it is required for all remote online notarizations. So I'm going to go ahead and prompt that for my signer here today. And she's going to get a pop-up that says Run Credential Analysis. And then she's going to get another pop-up here that tells her to begin verifying. And then the next screen, she's going to select the country that her ID is from, and then the type of ID that she would like to upload. And then the next screen is going to prompt her to continue on another device, such as her phone. She's going to go ahead and scan a QR code with her phone, and it's going to allow her to upload a photo of her ID. But whichever path the signer chooses, they will be guided through the same steps as you see here. They're just simply uploading images of the front and back of their ID. And Notary Cam will purge the images of the ID once the transaction has been completed, or after 30 days if the transaction has not completed. And the system will store a record of the ID verification as required for Ron. So we did get a notification here that she has successfully completed her credential analysis. So once the signer is done with that, they will move into the knowledge-based authentication. And the KBA is a series of 5 questions pulled from your public record that you must answer successfully in order to move forward with remote online notarization. And here at Notary Cam, we do require that KBA be completed on camera in the room while the notary is present. So I'm going to go ahead and prompt that on my side for the signer here today. And she's going to get a pop-up that says Run KBA. In the first window here, the signer will fill in their name, their date of birth, their home address, and the last 4 digits of their social security number. And just a reminder, the notary cannot actually see the signer's personal information. We are just showing you the signer's view for demo purposes. So once the signer submits their information, those 5 questions will be generated, and the signer must get 4 out of 5 questions correct, and they have 2 minutes to complete the questions. You'll see in the top right corner there, she's got about 1 minute and 45 seconds. And again, that's for security purposes, so they're not able to get assistance with those answers or Google answers, things of that nature. So the signer is only allowed to attempt KBA twice. If they fail both times, they will have to reschedule 24 hours later to try again. And then we did get a notification that the KBA was successful for our signer today. All right, so once two-step authentication has been completed, the notary will prompt the signer to complete the tag setup for them prior to the meeting. You'll see there in the top of the screen, she's got a yellow button that says Next Tag. So that'll bring her directly to where she needs to sign. And as you can see here, she can go ahead and select her digital signature. And then the signer is able to click into the tags to fill in the information that the notary has set up for them. You'll see that the signer is clearly identified with different colors. Theirs is purple, the notary's is yellow. And then everything the signer adds is automatically shown on the notary side. So the document is a mirrored image that instantly updates for each user as changes are made. So now that the signer has applied all their signatures and dates, the notary will be able to apply their information. So I'm going to go ahead and do that on my side, and you'll see that here in real time. I'm going to apply my seal here, and then my signature, and then our RON disclosure. That does state that this was completed via remote online notarization using two-way audio and video technology. So now that the notary has added their signature and seal, they can go ahead and lock the document. So I'm going to do that on my side. And then once that document is locked, that's basically embedding that digital certificate that John was mentioning before. So just give us a moment here while that processes. But basically what's happening is it's embedding that digital certificate and then applying an original ID to each document. All right, it looks like we're almost finished up here. So the document will appear on the right side of the screen. It'll appear in a green background, and then you'll see there she has the download button where she can now download the notarized document. And then she's going to go ahead and open that up for us in Adobe. And the reason that we're going to open that up in Adobe is we're going to show you the notarized document will valid with the valid certificate, and it will display a blue banner with the signature panel that has the tamper seal on it. So just give her a moment here while that opens up. And then we'll also talk a little bit about the audit trail after this. All right, it looks like she's about to open that up now. Okay, looks like it's opening for her here. All right, so there is the document. Of course, it's going to have samples stamped across it because we were in a training environment. But the blue banner across the top is that certified signature panel there that I was talking about. And then if she clicks on the certification, it will let you know that the document has not been modified. That's what that says. I know it's kind of tiny and hard to see. But that's it basically in a nutshell. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen now and show you what an audit trail looks like. So let me open that up. Okay, so this is a sample of an audit trail, and this basically identifies everything that's taking place within the transaction. You'll see here there's the signer's name, when the consent was given, which is the e-sign consent, the date and the time, which is really helpful. Sometimes people will actually try to deny that they didn't sign anything electronically or online, so this is why we do have the audit trail. It does show you the ID verification results that they passed, and then also the KBA results. And then also here, we show when the documents were uploaded into the room. And then if you go down, it also shows you when the signer actually applied their signatures and when the document was notarized. And then any notes that the notary may put in. So if there was an instance where someone didn't need to check an ID because the person was personally known to them, the notary could simply type within the notary notes that, you know, Sally Signer is personally known to me, things of that nature. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing and open it up to John.
Thank you very much. I really appreciate it. I don't think we need to share any more screens. Because basically the only slide I have left is saying thanks for coming. I want to thank NotaryCam, excuse me, very much for taking the time to show us in real time how this process works, particularly that it's not that hard to use. It's easy for for all parties to use it, whether you're the signer, the person who's going to be looking at the documents. It's a really great way to take advantage of a time-saving and certainly much more secure way of getting documents notarized. So we certainly recommend that you take a look at it. And I wanted to make sure that everyone had an opportunity here to show, it's not as hard as everyone might think it is. Oh, I don't have to learn systems and all that kind of stuff. It's pretty straightforward, particularly when you work with Notary Cam. So please make sure to go on our website, Virtual Underwriter. You can learn more about our approved platform vendors, particularly Notary Cam. You can get on their website. I highly recommend that everyone checks that out. So I hope you got a good experience. Thank you again for coming, and thank you again, everyone from Notary Cam, for joining this. We really appreciate your time.